The Barbara Rabin Chief Education Officer here at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. Thank you all so much for joining us for our second installment in this 2022 Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series. Today you will hear from Mark Jacobs. Mark is the son of Mike Jacobs. Mike was born in Konin, Poland in 1925. When Germany invaded the country in September 1939, he and his family were confined to the Ostrowiec ghetto. Mike survived several camps, including Auschwitz, before being liberated by the U.S. Army in 1945. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series. They include Big Brothers Big Sisters Lone Star, Congregation Tiferet Israel, Girl Scouts of Northeast Texas, Human Rights Campaign Dallas, Fort Worth, Jewish Family Service of Greater Dallas, Legacy Senior Communities, Temple Shalom, and Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. We are grateful for your support of the museum and our programs. You help us to put these kinds of programs on. I would also like to extend a special welcome to our board members, and volunteers in the audience. We couldn't fulfill our mission without you. If you are interested in becoming a museum member or volunteer, please visit our website, dhhrm.org, to learn more. And as I always say, what are you waiting for? Go. Come on, let's do it. In just a moment, Mark will share a story with you. Then we will have time for questions and answers. If you are joining us in person today, you can use the card provided to you at check-in to write out your question. If you are joining us virtually, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type out and submit your questions. And now it is my pleasure to turn things over to Mark Jacobs.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for being here. I'm Mark Jacobs. My father was Michael Jacobs, as Sarah mentioned, and he was a Holocaust survivor. Have to get a little oriented here. So this is my father, Michael Jacobs. He was born Mendel Jakubowicz in a small town called Konin, Poland, halfway between Berlin, Germany, and Warsaw, Poland. It was a fairly small town. His family had lived there for a while. And I'm a second generation, and I'd like to recognize Philip Glaubman, who's also second generation. His father spoke yesterday, and basically we're children of Holocaust survivors. So my father was a survivor, my mother was not. She was born in Dallas. Philip's mother was born in Dallas as well. So both our fathers found the loves of their lives in Dallas, Texas. Of all places, right? There we go. So my father was Mendel Jakubowicz. My mother was Ginger Chesnick Jacobs. My name is Mark. My Hebrew name is Moshe, so I'm named after my grandfather, Moshe Jakubowicz. His mother was Dora Jakubowicz. My sister's name is Deborah, so she's named after our grandmother. And my two brothers were named after uncles. And we all were born in Dallas. All four of us were born in Dallas. And we all still live here. As a matter of fact, we have sibling meetings once a month on Tuesday nights, so we get to catch up with each other. My parents, my mother was born here. Her father was from Russia, and her mother also came from Russia and they wound up in Dallas, which is a whole different story. Anyway, the original Holocaust Center was built in 1984. They started building it in 1984. And my father was the driving force behind the building of the Holocaust Museum. And it basically all came out of a group of gentlemen, and they're all pictured here. Philip's father is Max Glauben, who's on the far left. And then we have Jack Altman, Elie Wiesel, who was here looking at the plans, Sam Zor, and my father. And we all belonged to Congregation Shereth Israel. And one day, everybody was standing around, and they were talking, and my dad said, we need to start a Holocaust survivors group. And all these guys started getting together and meeting with the other survivors. And eventually, they were able to fulfill my father's dream, which was to build a Holocaust museum in Dallas. The original museum was in the ground floor of the Jewish Community Center on North Haven, and it moved across the street just about to a location that was only supposed to be temporary for a couple of years and turned out to be temporary for about 15 years. And they moved here just a couple of years ago. And as you see, it's a wonderful facility. Excuse me. The memorial room, the original memorial room, which is right behind me, is kind of replicated here, and if you go through the museum, you'll see it. And basically, it represented a number of things. So the gates represented, and they're kind of like fire, and when my father was still in Poland when he was a kid, and the Germans came in, they set fire to the synagogue, or they put a fire outside the synagogue, and they burned all the holy books and the holy scrolls. And that replicates that, and then inside you'll see the stones which represent the different major concentration camps, and a memorial to the people who died in the Holocaust. My father lost all his relatives, his parents, his sisters, his brothers. Philip's father lost a lot of relatives as well. We all lost a lot of relatives. What can we say? Uncles, aunts, cousins. My dad says that he lost about 80 relatives during the Holocaust. So here my dad is going to talk.
And I always said to myself in camp that one day I'm going to be free. And the time will come. I will try to build a center, not a memorial stone, but a center that people can come, learn from the past, to look into the future. That should never happen again. That children, young or old, can come to the center and touch it and feel it and walk out and see what one human could do to the other. My speaking to you over here or sharing my experience, it's not for me. I went through. It's for the future generations. That they can listen and look at it, look at a living survivor. Because I'm not going to be over here all the time. Someday I will have to go. They can say, yes, that's a survivor. He's telling the story. What one human could do to the other should never let them happen again. That's my children, my grandchildren, my grandchildren should not go through the horrors and should be left to see what the parents or the grandparents should go through. That they should not go out from this Memorial Center for Holocaust Studies in Dallas.
It's kind of nice seeing my dad up there speaking. Anyway, he was born in Konin, Poland, as I said. The town had about 10,000 people, about a third of whom were Jewish. It was a fairly small town. His family was there. He had relatives all over the place. His parents, he had three brothers and a couple sisters, and they all lived in the same house. He was the youngest. And their life was okay. They weren't rich, they weren't poor. They were probably upper. They were workers. They had what they needed. My dad always talked about with a great nostalgia for how he grew up. And I think he had a really happy childhood. The main difference, though, is that back in those days, he was forced to go to the secular school rather than going to the Hebrew school that most of the Jewish students went to. My dad had a great voice, so he sang in the choir. And they had a really nice synagogue building, which he was very fond of. And life was good. So if you see here, these are family pictures. The picture that shows my dad down there is part of a big group of people from the school that he went to, and he showed us the picture, and I was immediately able to recognize who he was, because that's kind of what I looked like when I was a kid. The picture of the four little girls that you see there are of relatives who I think all died in the Holocaust. And what's really interesting about this picture is the little girl here looks exactly like my niece Sarah, and the little girl above her looks exactly like my niece Lisa. And it was really startling when we first saw these pictures, and my nieces were around that same age. So you see his brother with friends, and his sister with a friend, and a brother with a friend, some cousins. One of my dad's greatest regrets is that he never had pictures of his parents. and we kind of wished that we'd be able to find some, but somewhere out there, they were all destroyed. Here we
Our
go.
city, as I mentioned before, they were all hard-working families. My family was working pretty hard to make a living, you know. My father, you know, had to work very hard to support, you know, 6 children, okay, till in 1935, if I'm correct, my brother became a master tailor. Let me explain to you what a master tailor is. He had to go to a special school to get a diploma that he can keep, you know, apprentices and to teach them to be tailors. At this time, we already did a little better living in our city. I remember, you know, that it was times, you know, that at night you didn't have any more bread, because it's not like over here you came into home, you had enough bread, you cut as much as you want. Over there you had your slice or 2 slices of bread in the morning and lunch, and you came home for supper, the same thing. And you had to wait for next day to have you know, your other meal, because it was a very hard living, but we always had enough meat on the table. Friday night we had a nice Shabbos, you know, in the afternoon we had our cholent, you know, and other things, you know. We were a very, very close family, very, very close family.
On September 1st, 1939, World War II basically started. Germany attacked from the from the west. The Soviet Union attacked from the east. Just prior to September 1st, the Soviet Union and Germany had signed a pact where they divided Poland. So my dad was about 14 years old. Around that time were the high holidays, the Jewish high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they were in the synagogue, and you can kind of see a picture where the wrought iron fence is, and behind that is the synagogue. It's quite a beautiful building. And now he's going to talk about how it appeared to him when the Nazis came and marched into the city.
1939, when the Nazis marched into our city, the first thing they did, they put a curfew. The Jewish people were not allowed to walk out from their homes from 6 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning, and the non-Jewish people from 9 o'clock till 6 o'clock in the morning. They took hostages, Jewish people and non-Jewish people. They put them to jail. They took also all the intelligentsia, the teachers. They brought them up to the Jewish cemetery, and they were shot. 99% non-Jewish teachers went into our beautiful ancient synagogue. They took out all the prayer books, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the prayer shawls, and all the religious memorabilia, and they put it into the square. After they emptied everything from the synagogue, they made a horse stable.
A couple of months after the Germans occupied Konin, they moved the Jewish population of Konin to the Ostrowiec ghetto, which Ostrowiec was a small town, what would have been a number of hours away if you went straight, but took a couple of days to get there. And you can see on the map where it is in relationship to my dad's hometown. So Ostrowiec had a small Jewish population, and the Jews of Konin and from other towns were forced to ride there in boxcars, where they would pack 75 to 100 people in the boxcars. And my dad recollects that they traveled for about 3 days to get there. And bear in mind, this is usually just a few hours trip as the crow flies. The Germans wanted to basically move out all the Jews from the western part of the country because they wanted it to be more Aryan, which is what the Germans advocated, basically of German stock. They thought the Jews were polluting their bloodlines. I was able to go back to Poland with my father 3 times, and my mother, of course, also went. And we went to Ostrowiec one trip, and it was really interesting because my father had not been back to Ostrowiec until that trip that we took. and we were walking around the town, and he was pointing out the different buildings and where the jail was, and somehow or another he'd been arrested and wound up in the jail, and he was able to escape. And as we were walking around the town, you could see his face was back in Ostrowiec back then, and he kept walking, slapping his thigh, saying, son of a bitch, excuse my language. But you could tell that he was very, very upset by his visit and moved by his visit, and he was right there the whole time that we were visiting. And he's going to talk about Ostrowiec here.
We came into Ostrowiec. I remember Jewish people were waiting over there from the city. We went into a big school. And from over there, they tried to put us in different homes, you know. And I remember they put us in a home, 2 little small rooms, 16 people, 3 families. Our family consists of 8, and my future brother-in-law, and some other 2 families. Aunt of mine with the 2 daughters, and another, my future sister-in-law with the family over there, you know, because we were staying together. And the rest of my family, my relatives, I mean, were staying in different homes. And that was the ghetto. People died of hunger, of sickness. I remember, you know, as a small boy, I still did not believe what's going to happen.
So my dad was, of course, a teenager. So he was also had blonde hair, bluish eyes. He was able to get around really easily. He was also very shrewd and a risk taker. So he would go outside the ghetto and go into the countryside and he would organize. And of course, organize, you think, you know, we all know what organize means, but of course what it really means is steal. And he would go to these different farms and he would take fruit and vegetables, and sometimes he'd make deals with the farmers and exchange things, and then he'd come back to the ghetto, sneak back into the ghetto, and distribute the food, not only to his relatives and to his family, but also to other people. Because bear in mind, you know, you had to live hand to mouth. You never knew where your food would come from. You never knew what was going to happen to you. It was a very, very precarious existence. So from Auschwitz, many of the people from Ostrowiec were sent to Treblinka, which is a death camp, and you see the slide up there where it was established in July 1942. And it only was open for a little bit more than a year. It was a total death camp. Basically, anybody who was shipped there was murdered. There were no labor camps. That's all it was for, just to kill people. And as you can see, there were 900,000 people who were killed there during that 15 months, and only about 100 people survived because they could escape. My father's family was sent to Treblinka, and he, of course, never saw them again. And now he's going to talk about the roundup that took place and how he was able not to go to Treblinka.
And when we went to the big square, I took a look to my left, and I said, they're selecting people over there. At this time, I saw to my older brother, next to me, I said, come on with me, I'm going to go to the square. He said, come on. I grabbed him by the hand, and I said goodbye to my parents and relatives, you know, the dark faces, the sad faces, could never see, screaming and yelling people, you know, pushing and everything, not knowing what's going on. And I came to this selection that tried to push me in with my brother back over there. They didn't want it to go over there. I sneaked through. As I sneaked through, they put us in a small little street, you know, in a small little place. We were waiting. And later we marched in. And don't know where my parents went. They went to the same thing. They went into the boxcars and they traveled. And later on I found out they went to Treblinka. As you know, Treblinka was a camp of no return. But that's what I was told. Between 700,000 or 800,000 people died over there. They went right away to the gas chambers and the crematoriums. There was a camp of, that's where they went. That's where the most people went, from Ostrowiec, Radom, around the vicinity.
You mean your mother and father went to
Yeah,
Treblinka?
all of my relatives, my brothers and sisters, yes, except one brother what died in the partisans.
Except for you and your brother that
Yeah.
separated yourself
That's
out from
correct.
the family.
That's correct.
When you separated yourself out from the family, did you say anything to your own family about why you were separating yourself out?
Nothing. You see, you have to make quick decision. They do not know. They say goodbye. I wave goodbye to them. And I moved away, right, quick, not saying where I'm going or not.
What made you think that that was the thing to do?
I don't know, some intuition or something, a drive not to go. Because I was afraid if I'm going to go to the square, I didn't want to go away anymore, be transported or do something. I don't know what the other group was selected to. Took a chance.
And he made the right decision because he was able to live, and all the people who were in the square wound up in the boxcars, and they were taken to Treblinka where they were murdered. He never saw, of course, any of his family again. His brother, who he mentioned joined the partisans, was eventually killed by other partisans, and he never saw him again either. Eventually, what happened to my dad was he was pressed into a labor detail, and they basically cleared out all the apartments of the Jews who had been shipped to Treblinka, and they took all the furniture out, and they took the tables, and they would knock on the walls to make sure nobody was hiding. They took whatever they could find, and a lot of these things were eventually shipped back to Germany for the German population. At some point, he finally was sent over to Auschwitz, and Auschwitz-Birkenau, as everybody knows, is the major concentration camp in Europe at that time. So you can see on the map where Auschwitz was in relationship to Ostrowiec, it's south, and you can see where Treblinka was. Again, when I went on these trips with my parents, we went to Treblinka, and of course it was very moving for my father because that's where he saw the place where his family was murdered. There's nothing there, basically, back from when Treblinka existed. It was all bulldozed over, destroyed by the Nazis back then. However, all the towns who had Jews in it from that time have put stones all around Treblinka. And we found the stone for Austrowitz, and we spent some time there. When we were there the first time, my dad, of course, was able to say some words to his parents, and it was one of the few times that I ever saw him cry. So my dad now is going to talk about going to Auschwitz. Arrival at Auschwitz-Birkenau.
To Birkenau, the cars opened, went down on the ramp, and we were waiting. As we were waiting, the orchestra was playing.
This was 1944.
44. The orchestra was playing. And I said to my friends, my God, take a look. We came into a paradise, clean, the orchestra is playing, welcoming us, everybody smiling and laughing. From the other side, you know, on the other side of the ramp was the women's camp, FL, the Frauenlager, what they used to call. Half a dozen women came out and they were waving on us, you know, smiling. I asked the prisoners over there, hey, what's going on? Where are we? The answer was a smile. Sure, they were not allowed. We were waiting. I looked to my right, and I saw smoke coming out from the chimneys. And I said to my friends, you know, when they ask me what profession I am, I say I'm a baker. You know, if I'm a baker, and they select me, I work in a bakery, I will never go around hungry. Okay.
As I said, my dad was pretty shrewd. He looked around, he was very observant, and he was able to figure out what he needed to do to survive. So eventually, as a lot of you probably know, the whole point was to dehumanize the people who were in the camps. So all their clothes were taken away from them. They went to the showers. They received a tattoo. My father had a tattoo on his arm. I drew a blank on 5490, B5490, I believe. And the B was for Birkenau. The people who were in Auschwitz had an A for Auschwitz. And this camp was actually one of the only camps where the inmates were tattooed. And then he was assigned to some bunks, and of course they had a uniform, and that's where they were. Now this is in 1944, and we've just gone through a couple cold spells where everybody was freezing and worried about not having enough heat in their houses or their offices. Bear in mind that this is Poland, very, very, very cold during the winter, and all they're wearing are thin pajamas, thin uniforms, wearing clogs or shoes that they can find. One of the years that my father visited Poland, he came back and he said, man, it was so cold. He was there in the winter. He doesn't know how they were able to survive the winter because it was so cold. And he didn't have anything, no overcoats, nothing. In the bunks, everybody slept right next to each other, and they helped keep each other warm. One thing about Auschwitz, of course, is the size. The size of Auschwitz with its subcamps was 15.5 square miles. Downtown Dallas is 1.4 square miles. So the camp complexes were 11 times the size of downtown Dallas.
We walked in to another camp, not knowing what the camp is all about, what we call the quarantine camp. As we walked into the quarantine camp, you were waiting, you had to stretch out your arm. As you stretched out your arm, they gave you a number, a tattoo number. They give you the tattoo number. And as they gave me my tattoo number, B4990, the assessment came to me, and they says to me, do you know what this number all about? I said, no, sir. Okay, let me tell you now. You are being dehumanized. You a number. Still don't know what he was talking about. Okay, still don't know.
So life, as you might imagine, was terrible. You never knew whether you had to line up in the morning, you had to line up at night. Sometimes you'd be out there for hours in the day, very little food, no water, no showers, latrines, horrible, horrible existence. My father was assigned to working in what basically was a scrapyard. And ironically enough, when he came to Dallas, he started his own scrapyard. So he learned the trade in the concentration camps. He would be on a train, and they would move between the main camp and the scrapyard, and that's what he did while he was in camp. He also joined the underground, and in October 1944, there was an uprising. It started a little bit premature because I think the Germans got wind of it. Fortunately, he was not killed, and they didn't catch him, and he was able to live another day. And he's going to talk about how he survived, because he was asked that all the time. How do you survive such a terrible situation?
How did I survive? I was a dreamer, a fantasizer. I tried to make myself human. Of course, they said I'm not. I saw birds flying into camp. I can see it right now, when I'm talking to you. I'm in Birkenau, laying on the bunk. I could see birds flying in and picking on the ground, and I said to myself, what they can pick on the ground if we cannot see it? And they flew out. And I said, why can't I be a bird? And I said to myself, Mike, close your eyes and start to fantasize. I closed my eyes and I was a bird, and I flew out and I was free. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the same surrounding, but for the few moments when I was dreaming and fantasizing, I was a free person. I was free. I was somebody again. Did you ever see boxcars or railroad cars traveling on the rail? So nice and peacefully in different directions, nobody's telling them, where are you going? They're pulled. Nobody's asking for an identification card, no nothing. And I said to myself, isn't it nice and quiet? Why can't I be a boxcar? I changed myself for a plank of wood to be part of the boxcar, and I was traveling again. I was free again. The most precious thing a person can have or can possess is to be free. Make no difference what you have, how rich and how the luxuries you have. When you're not free, you are nothing. Dreaming and fantasizing, make myself always reminding myself that I'm a person like anybody else, kept me going. And I always say I never lost my hope, never lost my belief.
In late 1944, 1944, early 1945, the Soviet Army, the Red Army, was coming in and entered Poland and liberating a lot of the camps. Of course, Germany knew that they had lost the war, but that didn't keep them from killing Jews. So whoever was left in Auschwitz who could move, they rounded up and they were on a death march into the interior. They were going west to some of the camps closer to Germany. And the people who were allowed to go, well, who were impressed into going into this death march, of course, went by foot until they could get to a railroad station, and then they were packed into boxcars. The people who were infirm had to stay in Auschwitz, and they were liberated in January by the Soviet Army. So in some ways, the people who were liberated in Auschwitz had a better chance of living than the people who went on the death march. My dad's going to talk about the death march.
January the 18th, 1945, the Russian army are closing in. They stopped 40 kilometers, 27 miles from Auschwitz. They could walk in with one tank and liberate us. They gathered us in Auschwitz, 1 o'clock in the morning of the 19th. They took us out. And we marching in snow, cold. 35 kilometers a day, no food, no water. I had plenty of water, snow. We marching, don't know where we're going. People what could not make it, I can see it now, the people, they're staring at me. Because they fall back, they lost their wooden shoes in the deep snow, or they couldn't make it, they fall back. They were shot, not with a regular bullet, but with a dum-dum bullet, with a shadow bullet. If the person gets shot in their head, the head will split in dozens of pieces. The side of the roads, you can see it now, was not white. Everything was red.
His boxcar, the train that he was on, wound up at Mathausen, which was another fairly large concentration camp in Austria. And he was put in a subcamp called Gusen II. And while he was there, they had hollowed out the mountains, and they were building Messerschmitt, which were fighter planes. And it was a small camp, and that's what he did for the remainder of the war, until he was liberated. He's going to talk about what his life was like at Gusen.
That took me down to Gusen. It was a small camp of 7,500 people. Every day used to bring up a transport of 1,000 or 1,500 people. Every day was the same amount of people. People died, new people came in. And they put me in to work in a factory building Messerschmitt planes. You know, the big Jaeger planes. And the factories were built already in the big mountains. Every day we used to get packed in the railroad cars, and we used to travel. It was too far to travel. They brought us back. I built a part in the plane, what we call the shot fender. It was a small little round piece. You know, you had to weld it, you know, electric welding, and I had to make nice 3 holes. Exactly had to be the 3 holes, because every time it was checked out to the 1/10 of a millimeter. Until the 3 holes, the 3 wires went back, but the pilot used to control the flaps in the back, slow it down and everything. But being in the underground, I say they're not going to get away with nothing. I was pretty fast to mix up things. The plane went up, the plane came down. They didn't know what happened. They thought there's something wrong with the aluminum. They used to come and try to test aluminum. That's what I used to do to the last minute, till May the 5th, 1945. My friends, when I go to Israel or they're in Europe or someplace in the United States where we in camp, they don't call me Mike. They call me partisan. They call me partisan. Everybody will call me partisaner. See, they're calling me by his name because they know, my friends, love friends might know, that's what I was doing.
May 5th, 1945, he was liberated by the U.S. Army. And, of course, what do you say? You're free. You're free. When we went to Poland on one of our trips, we also went to Mathausen, and it was the first time that my dad had been back to the camp. And my mother, my dad, and I were driving along the road, and I looked over and I saw this gate. And we kind of turned around and went back there, and that was the gate to Gusen II, which is where he had been. And they got out of the car, and my dad kind of walked inside the fence, and I'm on the outside of the fence, and then he walks outside the fence with my mother, and it's as if he's being liberated all over again. He had the biggest smile on his face. I think it's hard for us to imagine what that must be like. But from 1939, September 1939, until May 5th, 1945, he was basically in prison, never knowing from day to day when he would live, or whether he would live. And here he's going to talk about the liberation.
I say, okay, I'll go out, and I waved to the tank. A guy comes out from the turret, and I'm scared, comes out from the turret, and he threw in a small little bar. I picked up was a bar of chocolate. I grabbed it, I went into the barrack, and I said, take a look, can you imagine? They named this little chocolate Herschel. I couldn't spell the name Herschel. I said Herschel, okay? It was delicious. It was delicious. And I looked out again to the window. Now we have a guy, a civilian with a red cross band, with a soldier with a machine gun. And he waves, and everybody's scared to go to the fence. I say, okay, I'm going to go. I went to the fence. The guy tells me in German, that's, you are free now. The Americans are over here. And stay in this camp. Wait over here. We're going to take you back to the main camp of Mathausen. We're going to give you food and clothing. They told me I'm free. I was waiting for 5.5 years to hear this beautiful song, the beautiful melody, that I'm free. I'm walking out from this camp. No camps for me anymore. Finally decided, next day we walked out from this camp. As I walked out on the other side of the barbed wire, I stopped and I looked. Nobody's waiting for me. Nobody's welcoming me. Where do I go? I have no home to go home. And at this time I said to myself, Mike, don't you ever look back. Think positive and keep going. I kept going, went into Linz. And that's when I was liberated by the Americans, May the 5th, 1945.
He spoke about the Herschel Bar, and later on he met a gentleman named Bill Schaefer, who was part of the unit that liberated his camp. And every year, right around May 5th, Dad would receive a package from Mr. Schaefer, and it was a package of Hershey Kisses. And it was always something that we always looked forward to getting. And of course, he loved chocolate, so he would eat the whole bag. He wouldn't share it with us. So after the war, he wound up in Mittenwald, which is a small town in southern Germany. He basically organized sports clubs. He worked in a store. He did eventually find a first cousin who wound up in Montreal, but he had nobody back home. His earlier life was all gone. So he spent until 1951 in Mittenwald. I get the impression that he had a pretty good time. He had a very close group of friends. Back in the States later on, they would get together sometimes, and I got to know some of them, and they were really a very close group. Great people, great people. So in 1951, he was finally able to come to the States, and he wound up in Dallas. The story about that is he's supposed to go to New York, and the person who was checking him in before he left said, where are you going? And Dad said, New York. He said, you don't want to go to New York. You want to go to Texas. There you have an opportunity to really make something of yourself. So he said, okay. He had no idea what Texas was all about. All he thought about were cowboys, of course, and horses and things like that. But he came to Dallas, and when he came here, he had a place to live waiting for him. He had a job. He didn't really speak very much English, and he started his new life. And there's a picture of my father on the train taking him to Hamburg, where he caught the boat to New Orleans. And that's his travel document. And then there's his naturalization certificate. Ironically, I practice immigration law. So we still have this naturalization certificate. And when he came to New Orleans and he was asked what his name was, of course, Mendel Jakubowicz, and that's not exactly an easy name to say or to spell. So the person said, you really needed to have a different name, and he changed his name to Michael Jacobs. And Jacobs, of course, is kind of short for Jakubowicz. And officially, he didn't change his name until he became a citizen. And that's his naturalization certificate, as I said. And he became a citizen in 1957. And the naturalization certificates look almost exactly the same. And he made a life for himself here. He started a scrapyard. He got married. He had kids. He was very active in the Jewish community. And I'm going to have him talk a little bit about his life in Dallas. And by the way, the picture below the naturalization certificate was taken just a couple of weeks before he passed away. Back in the facility across the street, he would be here on Saturdays and Sundays, giving tours, talking to people. He wrote a memoir so people could get their books inscribed, and this was his passion. Telling a story he didn't want people to forget, and also telling people that you had to stand tall and stand strong and be an upstander and call out racism, misogyny, everything that makes life more difficult for everybody. He wanted everybody to really love each other, have hope, do the best they could in their own lives, help others. That's what he really advocated.
At this time, I said to myself, I will never stop talking, if people want to listen to me or not. I have two people. If they listen for 5 minutes to walk away, I accomplish 5 minutes. And I never stopped, because it's very close to me. Again, these people should know about it. This generation and generations to come, it should never happen again. I don't want the people here in the United States, what they say was no Holocaust. Hundreds of books are written about was no Holocaust. The Holocaust is a hoax. Auschwitz is a myth. Was never Auschwitz. Those people, what they come out and tell this story or write about the Holocaust was no Holocaust, was a hoax. These are the most dangerous people walking in this United States, because those people want you and the future generation to believe that was not happening, that was not true. And again, these people be caught off guard. God forbid if those people get the power, they will do exactly the same thing, maybe worse. We must know, we must remember, we must not forget. We must always say in our mind, it can happen again. We must not be indifferent.
And this is my father's legacy. My mother, my father, my sister Debbie, brothers Andy and Reuben, and then my father lived long enough to see grandchildren and even a great-grandchild. He died in July 2014, and just prior to his passing, he was able to hold his first great-grandchild. My sister got married. She has 4 daughters, and between all the daughters, there are 8 grandchildren. Now, the picture in the middle of my father in a soccer referee's uniform, he loved soccer. So one of the things that we grew up with was going to soccer games all the time, amateur games, professional games. He became a referee in 1961 because he was playing a game. He broke his leg, and he figured it's time to retire from playing, and he became a referee. And he refereed in the professional league that existed back then, the North American Soccer League. He taught referees how to referee. He refereed high school games until he was in his 60s, maybe even his 70s. And I have the license plate that he had from the 1970s that says soccer. So if you ever see a soccer plate on a car, that's me. And we all live here, as I said, and he did wonderful. He had a great life. And he always spoke about the Holocaust. I think there are people here from my office who came to the Holocaust Museum many years ago. I don't think they heard him speak, but they heard other people speak. And I've spoken for a number of years as well. And periodically I run into people who say, I heard your dad speak at my high school, and now I'm a high school teacher, and it's so wonderful to meet you and tell you how wonderful your dad is. And I'm sure Philip has run into the same thing. But my dad spoke to churches, schools. He was here every weekend talking to people. Philip's father was doing the same thing, speaking at Fort Hood, speaking at Texas A&M, churches, civic groups, anywhere they could talk, my dad would talk. And I would have guessed that he probably spoke to hundreds of thousands of people over the years. And that's really about it. We miss my dad a lot, and I think he'd be very proud of this facility. Unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to see it, but this was his dream, and he would be really happy that all of you are here today. Please take a tour of the facility if you get a chance. Remember what he say, though. You have to have hope. You can't forget. We live in very interesting times, as they say. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. We have to fight that. Anti-everything is on the rise. We have to fight that. And, of course, we know what devastation war can be around the world right now in the Ukraine. And my dad would be horrified at all this. But he'd still get out there and he'd say, you know, plug away, be upstanders, get out there and have hope, live a good life, because that's what you're here for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. So we have a number of questions that have come in, and if you have questions, please just raise your hand with the card, and staff will come around and collect those from you. So the first audience member wants to know, how did your dad and his brother get separated, and why was your father's brother killed by fellow partisans?
I think what happened is that my dad saw that everybody was going to the big square where they were rounding up all the Jews, and basically he had a bad feeling about it, and decided that he wasn't going to go to the big square. And he took his brother's arm and he said, hey, we need to go. And they sort of snuck out and they went to the little square. And the people who were at the big square were all transported to Treblinka and murdered. And the people who were in the little square, which is where my dad and his brother were, wound up in doing labor detail, emptying out the apartments, things like that. His brother wound up joining the partisans, and you had lots of different groups of partisans. Some of them were Polish, and they didn't like the Jewish partisans, and they would sometimes kill the Jewish partisans. And that's what happened. It was really kind of a shame how you had a lot of internal politics, but a lot of the Polish partisans wanted the Poles to be partisans in Poland to the exclusion of everybody else. So unfortunately, he was murdered as well.
Mark, did your dad ever share his opinions of the Nuremberg trials? More generally, what did he think of post-war justice?
I think you could talk to him about a lot of these things, but he was mostly interested in telling his story. Of course, he was very pleased with how Nuremberg came out. He thought it was very important, partly because the truth came out. You know, a lot of people didn't know exactly what happened. I think all of you have seen pictures and videos of how horrified people were when they saw the films of the concentration camps at the liberation. And there are a lot of liberators who were forever scarred when they came upon the concentration camps. So Nuremberg basically put into record what happened during the Holocaust. And he was very pleased that some people were brought to justice. Of course, there were a lot of people who were not brought to justice. And later on, many of them were caught and tried, and even in their 90s, they were sent to prison.
How did being raised by a Holocaust survivor shape you?
Well, there are a couple things. First of all, it was really difficult in the sense that we didn't have our grandparents like a lot of our friends did. My mother's father was still alive and he lived with us, but we didn't have my dad's parents or his family. So we didn't have any uncles or aunts. We didn't have any first cousins, and a lot of my friends did. And we really missed that. Dad was really kind of special. Because he always talked about what happened. He always talked about his family. He never did it with bitterness or with hate. He always was very factual. He could be very emotional because of what happened to him and who he lost. But we were always very aware of what had happened to him in our place as being a very close family. He mentioned that his family was close, and he was very sure to make our family close. But he wasn't bitter. He didn't talk badly about the Germans or about the Poles. We had German shepherds growing up, which is kind of amazing, considering what German shepherds were used for during the Holocaust. I still have German Shepherds. And he was very close to other survivors in town. They would get together and kind of talk about their lives and their experiences. And of course, they were very happy to, we were friends with each other. I've known Phil since we were in Sunday school together. And that's just what life was. You know, our father was a Holocaust survivor.
This question is actually for you, not about your father.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, did you experience any anti-Semitism growing up in the United States? And if so, could you talk a little bit about that, please?
You know, I can't say that I really did. Fortunately, even though I grew up in Dallas and the Jewish community was pretty small, but my life kind of revolved around the synagogue and Jewish youth group and Boy Scouts. The school I went to had lots of Jewish students. I went to St. Mark's, which was probably a third Jewish. So I personally didn't experience any overt anti-Semitism. It's very possible that there may have been some out there that I just didn't pick up on. I do know that I've had friends who had slurs shouted at them because they were Jewish. I can't say that I had any of my friends who were ever beat up. And part of that may have been because, believe it or not, because we were in Dallas and we weren't that much of we had a low profile. There just weren't that many Jews in Dallas when we were growing up. And I also think that part of it, there was just no animosity towards us.
Mark, what do you think drove your father to return to Poland all those times?
We never thought that he would ever go back to Poland. He never expressed any interest in going back to Poland. And the first trip that he made was probably around 1975, 76. And he went on a Jewish Federation mission. The Jewish Federation is an umbrella group for the Jewish community. And when he said that he was going back to Poland, we were like, my siblings and myself, we were like shocked because he never said anything about going back to Poland. Not that he had any animosity, he just had no desire to. So he went back, and he went back to the camps that he was in, Auschwitz-Birkenau. He was on this trip, so that it was certainly organized. And don't forget, Poland back then was communist. And the first time I went back to Poland, it was still communist. So it was a very different experience than going back now. He was able to make a side trip to Konin and see his hometown. My mother was saying when they came back that they could only stay for a few hours because the town was closing in on him and he just couldn't handle it anymore. And he also talked about when they came back, and this is what I found almost the most interesting part of his trip, was he talked about going to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and the fences around the camps were electrified. And a lot of people took suicide, how they said, they couldn't take it anymore. They'd go up to the fence, they'd hold onto the wire, and they'd be electrocuted to death. So when my father was there the first time, he went up to one of the fences and he put his hand around the fence, and it didn't kill him. And he released it, and Mother says that he started shouting, "I'm free, I'm free." So if you think about it, he'd never felt really free until 30 years after he was liberated. And one of the first things they did when they came back was they bought a new house. And that house was for my mother and my father, and they moved out of the house that I grew up in. And he really started to, I think, enjoy himself a little bit more after going back to Poland the first time. And then going back afterwards, there was always a different experience. We met somebody in Warsaw who became our driver. He led some tour groups from Dallas. He took all of us. He took the granddaughters. And what's interesting about his going back is that as he kept going back, he also became more comfortable being in Poland. And he started speaking Polish again, although a lot of the Polish he spoke was kind of old-fashioned. But he really enjoyed going back. It's really kind of strange, and I felt the same way. Beautiful country, it really is. The people were really nice, although when I was there with one of my nieces, there was somebody who walked by and shouted "dirty Jew" at us. And we had a wonderful trip there, and yet that's the place where my family was murdered, and millions of Jews were murdered.
Okay. Two final questions. First question, what did your father think about the birth and existence of the State of Israel? Did he think it was important?
He was a very strong supporter of Israel. There was a possibility that he could have gone to Israel, but he chose not to. He decided to come to the U.S. But from the very beginning, we always heard about being very pro-Israel. We grew up in a very Zionist household. My mother belonged to an organization that was very pro-Zionist. She spent some time in Israel and at one point considered living there, but she came back because her mother got ill. We visited Israel many times. I've been there 7 times. My parents had been there many times. And the other thing about Israel, of course, is a lot of the survivors wound up in Israel. So several of my father's first cousins wound up moving to Israel after the Holocaust. Some of them wound up going to South Africa. And there were other extended family members who lived in Israel. So Israel was kind of in our blood. Very, very supportive of Israel.
Okay, final question. What do you think your father's advice to young people would be?
He would say that you have to really be watchful against prejudice and bigotry of any sort, that young people need to be upstanders, which is what they're trying to teach here, and other places as well, because it's the young people who are going to make the future of our country and the future of the world. He would want you to be hopeful. He would say that you can overcome anything. You can overcome. He used to speak at eating disorder groups. You can overcome eating disorders. You can overcome family divorce, family death. You just have to reach into yourself and be strong and be faithful. He never lost his faith in God. And he wants you to live a good life, and do well, be strong, be honest, be kind, be kind, be kind.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Mike. I'd like to invite everybody to join us again at the same time tomorrow at 1 o'clock in the afternoon here at the museum or online, when we will be featuring Mr. Bert Romberg, who was on the Kindertransport as a child. Thank you again, Mark.
Thank you.